Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, he will run in an Alberta riding to reclaim a seat in the House of Commons. This is after Poilievre lost his long-held Ottawa area riding on Monday. Conservative MP Damien Couric says he'll step aside in Battle River Crowfoot to allow Poilievre to run in a by-election there. Couric was re-elected with nearly 82% of the vote on Monday, making it one of the most conservative ridings in the country. In a post online, Poilievre writes, "It is with humility and appreciation that I have accepted Damien Couric's offer to resign his seat in Battle River Crowfoot so that I can work to earn the support of citizens there to serve them in Parliament." Damien's selfless act to step aside temporarily as a member of Parliament shows his commitment to change and restoring Canada's promise. "I will work to earn the trust of the good people of Battle River Crowfoot, and I will continue to hold the Liberal minority government to account until the next federal election, when we will bring real change to all Canadians." Now, Prime Minister Mark Carney says he'll ensure that by-election happens as soon as possible. Until that date is set, though, the Conservative Party must decide who will lead them in the House of Commons when Parliament returns on May 26th. Former party leader and Saskatchewan Conservative MP Andrew Scheer joins me now. Mr. Scheer, it's good to speak with you again. It's been a while. Thank you for joining us today.
Good to see you, David. Thanks for having me on your show.
Yeah, thank you for being here. I want to start with the status of your leader. I mean, Pierre Poilievre started this year with a 20-point lead in the polls, but he lost the election and he lost his seat. So why should he stay as party leader?
Well, when you look at it, the polls going into the election had him in around high 30s, and we got 42%. We've got a record number of votes in the history of our party, and including the highest percentage of the vote in the modern Conservative era. So, in addition to gaining seats in places where we've never held them before, like Welland, we've got a large number of new MPs, and we've got a large number of new voters. People who have never voted Conservative before or who have never voted see themselves in our party thanks to Pierre's leadership and thanks to the fact that he's been speaking to their issues. All the terrible policies of the Liberal government that drove up housing costs, that caused crime waves and drugs to flood our streets and kill jobs and cause inflation. Pierre's been speaking about those issues, addressing them, offering solutions. And so this incredible result, while disappointing that we didn't win, is just a fantastic base to build on for the next election.
But, you know, in 2019, you won the popular vote. You increased your seats. You held the Liberals to fewer seats, and you won your own seat. And that wasn't good enough for you to stay around. So why is the standard different in 2025?
Well, my decision was because of the strain that it had put on my family, given the number of children I have and the ages that they were. I will just happily point out that Pierre got 8 or 9 points more than I did in 2019 and a large number of new seats. So, look, I mean, Pierre is the leader of our party. He's the leader of our movement. When I went door knocking, and I did in many different provinces across the country, from Vancouver Island all the way to New Brunswick, I would knock on doors and I would get people tell me not only did they never vote Conservative in past elections, but often that they never voted at all because they didn't think that the parties in Ottawa were representing them. Right. They came out and they voted for us. We've got blue-collar unionized workers saying, you know, the other parties have killed projects and made it so there's not enough work to go around, or they've devalued paychecks with inflation, and the Conservative Party was the one that was talking about building things in this country again and fighting inflation. So I think you'll find in the next days and weeks that the Conservative caucus is united. There's a tremendous amount of support for Pierre, and we're very grateful to Damien Couric and the people of Battle River Crowfoot, because Pierre's going to be back in the House in no time, leading the fight to hold this government to account.
But, you know, if the message was resonating with Canadians as strongly as you suggest, and certainly it was in certain places, how do you explain what happened in Carleton? I mean, voter turnout surged, and a national leader, a frontrunner to be Prime Minister, voted out by the constituents he's represented for 20 years.
Yeah, well, it wasn't just surging votes for the Conservatives in certain places. It was practically all across the country. I mean, we got over 1 million votes in Quebec for the first time in the modern Conservative era.
But 80% voted in Carleton, and more than 50% of them voted for Bruce Fanjoy to defeat Mr. Poilievre. How do you explain that, sir?
Still an incredibly, still an increase in support for Pierre in terms of number of votes. Look, it's about 4 or 5 days after the election. It's Friday. My own results only got finished counting this morning. There's still data trickling in. We're going to take the time, as any party should, after an election in which they fail to achieve the goal of winning and forming government, look at what happened. But let's not lose sight of the fact that if you had told Conservative MPs and Conservative activists a year or two ago that that our leader and our campaign team would get 42% of the vote, we would all say, sign us up. That's incredible. Obviously, something has happened. The complete and utter collapse of the NDP might be a new normal in Canada. You know, a lot of people are talking about the Conservative campaign. We should also include in that conversation how a party like the NDP, take Saskatchewan, for example, the birthplace of the movement, the CCF and the NDP, they went down to 7.5% in my riding, in the province. So, you know, this might be the new normal. This might mean that we need to rethink how we communicate on things and think about how we campaign. If the NDP had have gotten similar to their average over the last 5 or 6 elections, we wouldn't be having this conversation. So, you know, we have to fight elections on the train that we find them, and this may very well be something that is permanent going forward. But I think it's too early to kind of jump to conclusions about what aspect of the campaign right now needs to be addressed. We need to take our time and do that in a thorough and thoughtful way.
Well, big chunks of NDP vote in places like southwestern Ontario appears to have gone Conservative as well. So it's not entirely to the benefit of the Liberals, but the Liberals have now, they've just won their 4th election in a row, and they've had their highest vote share since 1980, I believe. So the way you're describing the data, it's almost like you feel like this is still a bit of a victory for the Conservatives when clearly it's a victory for the Liberals.
Well, first of all, to your point about the NDP, you are right. In places where the NDP vote came our way, we won the seats. We won seats in Windsor. I mean, when you look at the kind of ground zero, the front lines of workers who would be affected by U.S. tariffs, we won seats in the auto sector regions in Windsor. We won in Kitchener. We won in Hamilton, where they make steel. Here in Regina, where they make steel, where we make steel. Places where forestry jobs could be affected. Conservatives won farming and agriculture, mining. So in other places where those NDP votes went Liberal, obviously there were different results, but you know, no one's pretending that this is that we won the election. I mean, we are going to approach caucus and our party and our movement with the realization that we cannot do the exact same thing next time as we did this time. No one's suggesting that we're just going to copy and paste into the next election. But that being said, we need to focus on the gains that we've made. Our voter coalition now is much, much bigger and much more diverse, and has people who had never seen themselves in the Conservative Party. So we need to make sure that we keep them there, keep talking about the issues that affected them, you know, keep talking about housing, keep talking about crime and fighting inflation. I'm confident that if we do that, we will be able to build and get that final 3, 4, 5% that we need to put us over the top.
Right. Well, you talked about when you were knocking on doors, people, you know, responding to the message and saying that you were the only party talking about the issues that were important to them. But we've had a number of Conservative MPs and a number of Conservative candidates say that when they were knocking on doors, they were being told by older voters, by women voters in particular, they didn't like your leader, they didn't like his tone, they didn't like his style. And in the final weeks of the campaign, Mr. Poilievre, after being so central to everything this party has done for 2 years, disappeared from your ads. So at the end of it, was it Mr. Poilievre who was a drag on the campaign and was a challenge for you? Because some of your own candidates are suggesting that he was.
Well, you know, I just invite them to look at the facts that he took our party from 33%-ish to over 40. So, you know, that's an incredible gain, and that is directly linked to his inspirational leadership, his ability to communicate, the way that he led a team of capable parliamentarians. So you know, there's just an incredible amount of reason to be optimistic. And you know, I've knocked on doors, I've gone campaigning since 1999, 1997 even. You know, when I was first would have been about 18 years old. I have always encountered voters who never vote Conservative. You know, I've always heard from Liberals and NDP and people who have already decided to vote for other parties that they don't like our party, they don't like our leader. What we have to find out is, you know, we don't need to listen to the people who are never going to vote Conservative. We need to talk to the people who were open to voting for us, who might have not at the last in the last few days. But I mean, again, I think we also have to put this in context. I mean, what the Liberal Party did by dumping a sitting Prime Minister, suspending Parliament, having a rush leadership race with a new leader without really the time for Canadians to get to know, all under the threat of a U.S. Tariffs that dominated the news cycle. I mean, these are conditions that the Liberals should not count on happening again. Whereas our new voters are voting for us because of policies, because they see in our party a solution to the cost of living crisis, to the fact that their communities aren't as safe, the fact that they can't afford to own a home or move out of their parents' basement. So I'm incredibly incredibly optimistic about our ability to build off of our gains this time, and I'm optimistic that we'll be able to finish the job in the next election.
Right, but your party may not be able to rely on post-COVID inflation crisis that was fueled by, war in the breadbasket of Europe and supply.
David, you know this. You know that inflation is caused when governments print money.
Well,
That's what the Liberals did. The Liberals flooded the economy with brand new cash. It has nothing to do.
They spent money. They didn't print money. The Bank of Canada did not increase the number of banknotes in circulation in the economy. They used settlement balances. They used settlement balances to buy government bonds to put liquidity. I'm not being dishonest.
They created money out of thin air. They massively expanded the money supply. You know this.
They did not permanently increase the money supply, Mr. Scheer. But anyway, I don't want to have an argument on monetary policy. They used settlement balances to buy bonds, to lower interest rates, to put liquidity into the banking system, and then they removed those settlement balances over time. So,
are you denying that there is more currency, whether it's digital or real, in the Canadian economy today? Are you denying?
I'm saying they use settlement balances, and you're calling it money. There may be a small marginal increase, but it is not the anyway. Everybody had anyway. All right.
Yeah.
Here we go. But I want to ask about, we just disagreed on something here. There were obviously disagreements between your campaign and Jenny Byrne, Premier Houston and his team, Premier Ford and his team. And throughout the course of the campaign, the fractures between the federal Conservatives and various provincial Conservative governments, progressive Conservative governments, went public to the point that Tim Houston kind of unprompted confirmed reporting about, Ms. Byrne making not physical threats, but political threats to people in his office. I mean, is that a winning strategy for your party? I mean, is this the sort of way the operations are going to continue?
Well, look, I mean, I'm not going to speak to things that I have no idea if they're true or not. I know that Jenny ran a fantastic campaign. She's an incredible movement conservative who has sacrificed so much for this party and laid it all on the line and got us 42% of the vote and massive increase in our seat across the country. So, I don't think Canadians want to hear too much from political premiers who might not have had a phone call returned. I think they want to hear from federal leaders, federal Conservative MPs and our leaders speaking about how we're going to hold this Liberal government to account, push it to enact policies that protect the value of their paycheck, crack down on crime, address the housing issue, the housing cost issue, and that's what we're going to be focused on. Right,
but I mean, having an effective First Minister's table, having a good working relationship with provincial leaders and premiers, I mean, that's an important part, right? If you want to get that 3 to 4%, to get you over the top, don't you need to demonstrate that you can at least work with governments of more or less the same political stripe?
I think you'll see that Pierre Poilievre has been able to bring so many people together in this conservative movement, both in caucus, in terms of our membership, and obviously our voter coalition. I'm very confident that after the next election, when we are successful, that he'll be able to bring premiers together from all political stripes, from west to east, and he's demonstrated that. He's demonstrated his ability to be that unifier and be that person who can pull people together to find that common ground within our own movement. Brought us to 42%. Other leaders at the time have tried to get new votes by burning other voters and by turning their back on the Conservative movement in one issue or another. Pierre hasn't done that. He's grown the party without losing voters, and we've added seats without breaking faith with our core Conservative values. And that's the type of leadership that he brings to the table, and I'm confident that after the next election, other premiers will the premiers will be able to see that as well.
So, Mr. Scheer, what can we expect to see? I mean, you were the House Leader in the last Parliament for the opposition. What can we expect to see when Parliament comes back later this month? Because things were not functioning well last time, and there was a report in the Toronto Star last month about an internal Conservative strategy document to make committees a torture chamber for government, to use parliamentary functions basically to generate clips for social media and stall the government agenda at every sort of opportunity. Is it going to be more of that when Parliament comes back, or given the threat of Trump looming over everything, is there going to be a real attempt for everyone to cooperate?
Well, I completely reject the characterization of that. Conservatives use committees to litigate and prosecute liberal corruption, liberal waste, and liberal mismanagement. And the tone of Parliament is really set by the government. You saw the Liberal government in the last Parliament grind the business of the House to a halt rather than hand over documents for a scandal, for a corruption scandal that sent millions of dollars to Liberal friends. So it'll really be up to Mark Carney, and he can determine how Parliament functions based on how honest he is, how respectful of Parliament he is. But it's absolutely appropriate for Conservatives to get the message out when the traditional media doesn't cover the gross corruption and mismanagement at the committee level. Of course, it's appropriate for us to highlight that and make sure Canadians are aware of what's going on.
But when we go back on the 26th, after the King is done, given the speech, I mean, we're going to go back to privilege questions that stop government bills from going forward. I mean, Mr. Carney showed some grace today to Mr. Poilievre, saying, I will call your by-election at the earliest opportunity, you know, which is a shift in things. I mean, so does that get reciprocated in how Parliament works, or are we back on sort of the same issue set that was there before proroguing?
Well, in order to have a question of privilege, the government has had to have breached privilege. And when we use the word privilege, I hope your viewers understand, we're not talking about the things that MPs use about their daily business for their own creature comforts. We're talking about the right of Parliament to get information for Canadians, to find out where the money is going, where it's being wasted. When a government ignores the right of Parliament to be that voice of taxpayers and to be transparent and be held accountable, when they breach those privileges, that's when there are questions of privilege. So there won't be any questions of privilege on the first couple of days. If Mark Carney and his cabinet don't breach those privileges, then there won't be questions of privilege going forward in the future. But if they do, then it's our job to hold them to account.
Okay, so look, the next step for your party is Mr. Poilievre will have to run in this by-election, and presumably, if you lose that one, Mr. Scheer, there's going to be a problem. I don't think you're going to lose that particular riding. But you've got to settle on an interim leader and who's going to lead in the Parliament until Mr. Poilievre returns. Who do you think that is going to be? Do you want to do that? And how quickly will we know for sure?
Well, it's great news that whatever whoever it is, it will be a very short term, because it looks like Pierre will be back in the House in no time at all. So what we're looking at is a parliamentary leader to perform the functions that require a member of Parliament to do. But we still have a party leader. It's Pierre Poilievre. The caucus is behind him. The movement is behind him. We're going to let our caucus come together. We've got a meeting scheduled now for Tuesday. So our new MPs, our returning MPs, will get together. We'll have these discussions. We'll make a decision as a team. And out of respect for that process, I'm not going to speculate as to what might come out of that.
Do you think you'll pick that leader, the interim leader, on Tuesday, or could it be a little bit longer? I don't know if you know
yet.
You have
a job to do. I understand you have to ask these questions, but I respect our caucus process so much. I don't even want to go tiptoe down the road at all. We're just going to let that first meeting take place. We're going to have those discussions as a team, and we'll see what happens from that.
Okay. Will you offer your name as a candidate for that?
I'm not even going to step one toe.
It's a news program. Make some news. No, I'm kidding.
I know. Sorry.
All right. Well, Andrew Scheer, it's been a long time. It's good to talk to you again, and thank you for coming on the show, and we hope you will come back. That's Conservative.
Yeah, go check that Bank of Canada statement on the amount of currency in the economy, David. You'll see I'm right.
I will, and you Google settlement balances, and then we can have another conversation. All right?
If it exists, it's in the economy.
All right. Yeah, but it can be removed. Anyway, that's another story. Andrew Scheer, good to talk to you, sir. Thank you for being here. All right, our party insiders, our panel's been listening in on that. Melanie Richer, Fred Delory, and Greg McEachern. Mel, let's start with you. I mean, what do you make of that? Sounds like there remains strong support for Mr. Poilievre, and that he will very much likely end up staying on as leader and coming back as opposition leader when he wins this by-election, unless there is a very shocking outcome out there. What are your thoughts?
I have a lot of thoughts, David. A lot of thoughts after that conversation, I'm not going to lie. I think it's funny that, the only reasons the Conservatives lost were because of the NDP, yet, 17 or 13 of the 17 seats of the NDP losses to the Conservatives. So I don't know how that math works. And I'm glad to have heard you push back on how, what we dealt with in the election was the split of our voter base to both the Conservatives and to the Liberals. I think, I'm not a Conservative, so if you want to keep Pierre Poilievre around, awesome. For my mental health, I wish he would go away, but that's just me. But as it relates to, what comes next for the Conservatives, I think it's a mistake if you think we're going to be fighting the same election next time around. I think folks, what we saw based on Pierre Poilievre's numbers and on the Conservative numbers is Pierre Poilievre was not popular because people liked him. Pierre Poilievre was popular because they wanted change. And what we saw in the election, particularly with our orange-blue voters, is that was true. Folks who, in the orange-blue universe, were voting for Pierre Poilievre. They were not voting for Pierre Poilievre because they liked him. They were voting for Pierre Poilievre because they could not stand the Liberals. So I think that that's also a mistake to believe that. I'll give them all the credit that Pierre Poilievre is a good prosecutor, a good communicator, but I think that is an interesting kind of spin on things that we heard there from Andrew Scheer. I thought it was interesting too to hear that caucus conversations are next week. Obviously, we knew that was coming, but to move ahead quickly on a by-election and to move ahead quickly on a campaign that you want to stay on as leader, I find that interesting. Do you have caucus support? Potentially. But that to me is interesting, particularly because I think they would have a leadership review in the fall anyways. I think they line up at the same time that we would. So to move ahead on all those things without having a conversation with members and caucus, to me maybe seems like a mistake. But again, I'm not a Conservative, so I could be reading, the internal situation all wrong.
Fred, what's your thoughts on what we heard there from Mr. Scheer about where things are?
Oh, I don't think there's any question that Pierre Poilievre is going to be the leader in the next election. If he was to resign today and call a leadership race, he would win that vote on a first ballot. He has the support of the party. He has the support of caucus. It is a different situation. We're watching this campaign and the way it was unfolding. There were times when we all thought I didn't give a prediction like Greg, but I thought a large Liberal majority was coming. And he held it to a minority and 144 seats. And he made inroads around the 905 that I think a lot of us didn't see. There were seats in Brampton that we won. So I think it changed.
One Brampton, I think.
Yeah,
but still, but a lot were close. Brampton was really
very close.
Right?
Atlantic Canada. I was doing CBC Radio election night. When we went into Ontario and Quebec and the rest of the country, when we left because their polls were open 2 hours earlier, we were at around 12 seats. Now, advanced polls did shift that, and I am very grateful that the Liberal Party decided to stop campaigning for the last 10 days of the election. That really helped our cause. But the reality is, I would say Pierre is very, very solid where he is in terms of the leadership, and I don't see any way he's going to do that. As Melanie referenced, there is a national convention coming where there is an automatic leadership review. There's no doubt in my mind he will pass that with flying colors. I'm sure they're going to put a lot of work in to make sure. They're going to be focused on that. He'll be an MP by the time that convention happens as well, which will be hopeful. He'll be leader of the opposition again, and he's going to win that, and he will go in. And now, to Melanie's other point about the next election will be different. There's no question there's a different issue set 1, 2, 3, 4 years from now. But I think it's more of, when Mr. Scheer is explaining where we are now, he's talking about this past election and the growth that we've had.
Greg, your thoughts?
Other than the fact of the platform where the former Conservative leader just spoke to you, which is CBC, which they haven't been on in a long time, and quickly on that, if that wasn't a mistake, why they've lost the election now? Conservative MPs are appearing back on CBC. I'll leave that there. He said to you, check with the Bank of Canada. I had the ability to do that while you were chatting with him. Take a look at August of 2022. They put out a statement. They did not print money.
No,
they
look.
I don't want to.
I can very quickly say there is a quantitative easing technique that is available only to central banks, where they can use what's called a settlement balance to buy government bonds that are on the
David,
market.
my dear friend, as Fred would say, you're explaining. It doesn't matter.
No,
that guy right there, that is a gift to the Liberal Party, right there, because that guy lost 6 years ago. Diefenbaker stuck around for 12 years, haunted Stanfield, haunted Clark. 6 years, that guy is still around. One of the problems with the Conservative campaign is we could not figure out who his cabinet would be, who his finance minister would be. Pretty much Andrew Scheer is the only person that they put in the window, and it's somebody that lost an election in 2019. And I will remind people, Andrew Scheer said he was sticking around as leader too, and we know what happened there. Melissa Lantsman.
So did Justin Trudeau. Everyone says they're sticking around.
Melissa Lantsman is one of the people that helped take him out of there. Everything he just said there is exactly what the Conservatives said before the election and why they got into trouble. It doesn't appear from that interview that they've learned anything.
Well, we'll see. But I just want to explain so the audience understands. Settlement balances. It's a technique you use to buy government bonds. It lowers interest rates, puts liquidity in the banks. It does temporarily increase money supply, but unlike when you print banknotes, you can draw these back and then reduce money supply. So it's almost like a back of a house increase to make the banks feel secure. And at the time of COVID, you needed to cut rates and free up money for lending because people were desperate. But the settlement balance can be pulled back in a quantitative tightening phase, and it is not a permanent increase in the money supply, which is printing money, which causes inflation. It's different.
The leader of the party that I support is a former governor of the Bank of Canada.
He would understand what these are.
And he would understand that. And the person who just spoke, his leader wanted to fire the governor of the Bank of Canada. So I know who I'm going to believe.
Sure. I mean, go ahead, Fred. You want to jump in?
I think the previous parliament in the last 10 years we had a prime minister who publicly said, he doesn't pay attention to monetary policy.
You forgive me if I don't think.
So it's funny that this parliament is great.
He will focus on monetary policy.
There has been a change.
Yeah.
There's been a certain change.
So Mel, what do you think is going to happen, though, based on that conversation with how Parliament is going to function, right? Because, Mark Carney did do Pierre Poilievre the courtesy of promising an early return, and I was trying to get a sense there from Mr. Scheer of how Parliament would function. I know he disagrees with my characterization of how things worked at committee, but I was quoting from a document that his party prepared that the Toronto Star got a copy of. And, things didn't work for whatever reason, and the Liberals were part of it, too. There's no question, but I don't know if they have a strategy document on it. What do you think we're going to see when Parliament comes back on the 26th? Because it's not going to be Pierre Poilievre against Mark Carney, and I don't know how that changes how the opposition functions in that dynamic.
Right. One of the things that we had talked about before the election campaign was how untested Mark Carney was, and how it wasn't, the ability of talking about policy, but really the ability of people getting under your skin and how you work with that. I think what we saw in the debates is it actually was harder to get under Mark Carney's skin than one could have imagined. He just was, maybe a little bit boring in response or not super, not flashy, that's not the word I'm looking for, but able to pass a message in the same way. He just kind of went back to what he knew. So I think in that context of Parliament, if you're somebody who's going to respond that way, like we saw Mark Carney respond in the debates, it kind of makes it a little boring in the House. So it's harder to get under somebody's skin, you're not really getting the clips that they were getting under from Justin Trudeau. And I think that might be harder for temperatures to rise if you're kind of staying at that level. So it'll be interesting to see what happens the next few weeks. I think the Conservatives have to probably cool it a little bit for at least until the fall, at least until Pierre Poilievre is in the House. You obviously want to continue to pass your message, but the strategy for them has really been focused on Pierre Poilievre. So you don't want to give too much wind to somebody in his absence. So I would imagine, folks sent us to Ottawa to fight Trump. Let's fight Trump for the next 2 weeks, and then maybe a new play come the fall when Pierre Poilievre is back in the House.
Yeah, Greg, I think we got a pretty good sense today from Mr. Carney what kind of a prime minister he wants to be, right? These things, this priority, I'll deal with Trump, but while we're doing that, we got to fix our productivity problems in Canada as well. I don't know what kind of a parliamentarian he is going to be, and the minority government creates a little bit more uncertainty and urgency around that. So how do you think the day-to-day dynamic might play out when we get back to the combat, face-to-face component of parliamentary democracy?
It really depends on what message the Conservatives decide that they've heard. From Mr. Scheer, I'm not sure that they've really heard much of a message. It was the NDP collapse. He also made a reference about mainstream or traditional media. I'm not sure after the debates that's really a wise area for the Conservatives to go to when they start talking about so-called independent journalism, because I think what Canadians saw they didn't like because of that. I'm not sure Prime Minister Carney will have a lot of time for that. I mean, there's been some, look, on all sides, I agree, but, in Cape Breton, there was a candidate who refused to congratulate, conservative candidate, refused to congratulate the Liberal victor because he got his hair cut. I should explain to you a haircut.
Yeah, I cut my hair every day, actually.
I make that call from a big class house. But there was another winning candidate in Saskatchewan that said, it was all fighting terms that he wanted to do with Carney. It's up to the Conservatives. I believe that Canadians have sent us all a different message, then that's not what they want. Maybe I'm wrong, and maybe it seems so far that the Conservatives have heard a different message.
So Fred, I mean, if you were advising whoever the interim leader is, or I mean, how would you recommend they come into Parliament after the 26th? Because middle class tax cut by July 1, free trade by July 1 internally. These are things that are going to require legislation and cooperation. If we go back to sort of like filibuster and obstructionism, it's not going to happen.
Right, keeping in mind the filibustering and obstruction was based on actions that the Liberal government did previously and what they did in Parliament, not giving documents to the political parties after the House of Commons asked for them.
Yes.
If as Mr. Scheer said, if the Liberal government continues to, again, I don't know if they're going to be asking for these documents or anything like that, if they continue to refuse to present them, then it's the opposition's duty to do these sort of things. But
well, just context on that. They wanted, they used their privilege to compel the production of documents to be turned over to the RCMP so the RCMP can do a police investigation. The RCMP said, don't do this because it taints the evidence chain. No, but just, yeah, I agree. Parliament is supreme. Parliament is supreme and it can do it. The question is whether it should do it and whether it's useful in doing it, because the RCMP is saying this creates rights violations issues and evidentiary issues that even if you gave us something that is incriminating, we may not be able to use it in a prosecution because of the way it was obtained. So, like, it's not a clean one.
I hear you what you're saying.
But yes, it is a brief breach of privilege.
Should be supreme.
I agree.
Privilege is important.
Yeah, I didn't raise that to argue with you, just so the audience could follow the details.
But on that point, like, it's about what happens in this Parliament. But just to step back, as a Conservative strategist, what I would do, I would go to ground and try to figure out how did we not win this election. I would be going full tilt on the research. Melanie pointed out a lot of NDP voters actually went Conservative. If you break down the numbers, it wasn't NDP plus Liberal versus result in this election in many, many seats. It was a lot of them broke towards us, or maybe it didn't. Maybe it was some went Liberal and then Liberal voters came to us. We're just looking at basic numbers on the public data. We have to go to ground and do real legitimate research on this, and I'm sure all parties will. Well, sorry, parties that have budget that can afford to do it.
All right now.
But the two main parties should do it. Sorry, Mel. Should really figure out. You got to figure out how did the votes move and assess this summer. Spend the time to do it to get the message right and figure out when you come back in the fall where we're going.
Okay, I think actually the biggest debt the Liberals owe right now is the Bloc Québécois voters. Because it was Quebec and the 44 seats they got there. Ontario's where they kind of got let down because the NDP votes they did get kind of gave them vote inefficient wins in the Toronto core.
Well, they lost seats. They went down.
They went down. They lost seats in Ontario, and that's the big thing.